All right, well here we're going to try to kick this thing off again. Okay, good. It says it's being recorded, so you got it. Good job. All right, so we'll start over. Sorry for that. Hey everyone, my name is Brian McKeiver. I'm Kentico MVP and co-owner at BizStream. We're here to talk today about how you can reduce churn via predictive analytics in Kentico. And before I really dig into the topic 100%, I just want to do a few shout-outs to get started. So once again, this is, I think, my second time presenting at the Kentico user group. Very happy to do it because I firmly believe that there are a lot of Kentico enthusiasts around the country and around the world that can benefit from people who have experience with Kentico sharing knowledge, sharing common problems that we all have when we build websites, and I think the Kentico user group is a good platform for that. I know the people who run it, and they encourage this to be a driven affair, right? So it's not just about BizStream or HiMonkey or even Kentico. It's everyone coming together and working to make things better. So if you're new, if you haven't heard about it, I encourage you to check out KenticoUserGroup.org. That's where you can find out more. You can find out some of the other events. I think you can even see past events, watch past recordings. And hey, if you're interested and want to speak on a topic, I think there'll be a way to contact the people in charge there as well. So thanks again to HiMonkey for just making sure that this event happens. I know that we're happy to do so, happy to contribute, and hopefully today you're going to learn a little because this is an interesting kind of side topic to what we do, and it's right in the middle between technology and marketing, so hopefully it can apply to a broad audience. So we'll kind of dive in now. And like I said, the title is, how do you reduce churn via predictive analytics? So there's a lot going on in that title. One of the first things that I think we should explain is what we want to learn today, or what we're going to go over. So I always start with some goals for a presentation. In this presentation today, we're going to try to understand what is churn and why is it important. Then look for things that may indicate it. We call those churn indicators. And then what do we do about it? How do we measure, make sure that churn isn't happening, and translate it into, using data, using predictive analytics as a way to not just guess about what's going on and why people may be using your website or leaving your website, but instead create some metrics, create some ways to measure and understand what's going on. And then hopefully, if we focus on what's going on, we can stop churn, because at the end of the day, churn is not a good thing. And I will use that to lead into my next slide, which is, what is churn? And if I was in the room with you and I could see, at this point I would say, all right, everybody raise your hands if you know what churn is. And I would probably expect maybe half of the room, or even slightly less than half of the room, to really raise their hands. But the definition of churn is really customer turnover. And that means that someone has bought into your product or service, they're using your website, and maybe the easiest example to think of is like Netflix, right? Everybody knows what Netflix is, and it's a monthly pay-as-you-go subscription. Well, Netflix is very, very interested in how many people are joining per month, how many people are using their system per month, and then how many people are leaving. And churn is the term, or customer churn, or user churn, is the term that they've kind of given well, someone was using our system for a month, 10 days, 30 days, or 3 years, but now they're leaving. And when you're a software as a service business, when you're an e-commerce business, or even a membership-based website, you usually are pretty worried about how are we keeping people active, are they finding value with our service, and why might they stop finding value, why might they leave? So churn is all about looking at customer turnover and why people are leaving, and that's really kind of the best definition I can give. And why does it matter, right? That's, I think, the other thing, that why would we spend this webinar talking about churn? Well, at the end of the day, statistics have shown, and I can read this one to you, that almost 9 in 10 customers have abandoned a business or service, really, because of poor experience. And at the end of the day, when your customers are leaving you, you could sum that up as a bad thing, which could, indicate that something is wrong with that service or that business. And I think this is very interesting because we've actually just even launched another software product at BizStream. We have a couple others that we monitor things like users and how often they're contributing, using, to understand, are we providing a good value to that customer? So if you don't watch out for this churn concept and people just start leaving, that's a bad thing, right? It could end up killing that product or service that you're getting that revenue from. So how do we maybe look at saying, choose to stay using our service to provide that good experience, because we do not want 9 of our 10 customers to abandon us. So what then may be a reason that churn is happening or that people are leaving the business or service? And I think a couple of the all-stars, as they say, of prime examples of where people are not staying on a service is that first honeymoon period, right? You've just bought into Netflix, you've just bought into another software as a service. Maybe it's a piece of software you're using to run your project management at your company. God knows we've got just a few of those around the BizStream. But basically, in that first honeymoon period, when you're going through those first few days, weeks, that can define the success of whether or not somebody will use that product continually. If you don't have a good onboarding process, if you're not sure what to do next, if you have any kind of hindrance or burden to someone as they're starting up in that new product, that could lead to someone who's just not going to use it. They're going to stop using it. And they call that bad onboarding. And onboarding is that process of getting started. How easy is it to, when you're a brand new user, click the first few buttons that show you that this product can help save you time, save you effort, and hopefully at the end of the day increase your revenue. So onboarding, whether it's good or bad, is definitely something to kind of think of in terms of that can lead to churn. The other thing is that once you're past that honeymoon period and you're maybe 2 months in, 3 months in, a year in, if you're not providing ongoing success and if someone isn't still keeping that product going and using it in their daily work, they may just forget they have it, literally. And when they're not feeling, the customers aren't feeling that type of success, they also just be like, well, I don't really need this anymore. And I think of this as some of our streaming music options. We've done a lot of streaming music at BizStream to kind of power our day, and we've went through Rhapsody, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Music, Amazon Music, every other music service you can imagine we've done. But after a time, I think that, especially like Rhapsody, we just kind of stopped using it because there was either A, something better that came along, or B, we weren't finding enough value in continuing that service with that radio. So if you don't have ongoing success, if you don't have an ongoing reason to use it, or something better comes along and you're not out in front of that, that's another indicator of a reason for a customer to leave. And then the last kind of classic example of why people churn is something just out of control happens. The natural act of God, whatever you want to call it. Someone has a medical emergency and they leave. Someone has family stuff that happens, personal stuff that's just things that you can't necessarily account for, that you should know not to focus on those because they're going to cause churn anyways. But it's just, these are the 3 typical categories that I see when I've done my research into why churn happens. And you've got to definitely, watch out for these things. So what do we do about it? Honestly, I think I could just, stop here now. If anyone thinks the best thing to do is cross your fingers and toes to hope people keep using your service, but I don't think that's a valid business strategy, right? I don't think we want to just sit there and hope that people are going to come back to our site and use our system, use our product, use our services. So I am telling you that this actually is not the answer. You do not want to just cross your fingers, and I will definitely keep the webinar going to hopefully give you some ideas on what to do. But churn happens. It's part of our daily job. But what can we do about it, right? So I'm a big believer in data and looking at data to understand when there's a success, when there's a failure. And they say that when you're really looking out for churn, or if you're providing value, it's important to understand how your product or service is being used. This chart here is a classic example of what you can do to say, all right, I have X amount of users signing up for my system, joining my site, buying my products. But what are they doing next? Are they filling out a profile? Are they downloading a white paper? Are they watching a video? If you start breaking your product or service or website into different features, different steps along the way, what is being used and what isn't? This is super important when you start looking at the overall performance and the customer health of what's going on in your product or service. So we're trying to illustrate that as if you're seeing a growth like this, like what this chart is showing, that feature 3 and feature 1 are being used more and more as time goes on, that's a really good thing. That's the type of chart you want to see. But if you're seeing it in the opposite direction and you're starting to see people leaving the site and not using it, you've got some issues. So by tracking each feature or each part of your application, you're going to be able to get that insight into what's going to happen. So one of the first things that we're going to start talking about is how do we track, how do we understand what's being used, what isn't, And at the end of the day, we're trying to answer the question of how are we providing value, right? Because that's what matters the most. So I've talked a lot of theory at this point in terms of what churn is from maybe a marketing standpoint and a business standpoint, but I also want to bring this into Kentico. So we, as Kentico user group people and members, are pretty interested in generally using Kentico to help us solve business problems, business challenges, do better at digital marketing. So the Kentico online marketing feature set plays really well into this idea of looking at customer health and understanding if there's churn or not. So obviously we're pretty familiar with Kentico online marketing features at this point. This chart shows off what Kentico's online solution can do. We're going to focus a little bit today on the ones that I've highlighted here in orange, which is maybe not all of these, but there's definitely pieces of the puzzle that I'm going to show how we can use to watch and track what's going on our websites. That hopefully you're going to learn something a little bit new today about some of these online marketing features, because it's some pretty cool stuff, honestly. And really, the first one that we talk about anytime that we're looking at what's going on with our website is analytics. And today, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about analytics. I'm going to talk about activity tracking and other parts of the online marketing feature set in Kentico that can apply to measuring the health and wellness of your application, and not necessarily from a technical standpoint. So I know it's hard, even though I'm a very technical person. I love writing code and all that kind of fun stuff. I'm going to try to stay away from that a lot. I might dip into it a little, but we're going to talk about maybe how do I, as a business owner or a digital marketer, understand these parts of Kentico and use them and apply them to this concept. So we'll get into web analytics, but actually before we jump really into the analytics aspect of things, we're going to talk about the first major part of Kentico that applies to understanding churn, and that is activity tracking. By now, hopefully you're aware that Kentico has this really great contact management app, and as part of that, whenever visitors come to our website, it starts tracking all the pages that they look at. It starts tracking the conversions that they do if they're buying a product, if they're adding a product to a shopping cart, if they're signing up and registering for a user account on the site, and if they're logging in or not logging in. So it does all this great micro-level tracking that sometimes analytics doesn't quite cover from a macro level. And I've always, people ask me the question all the time, should we use Google Analytics or Kentico Analytics? And my answer is use both, because they both do certain things. But as we talked in the first chart about tracking product usage, this is one of the tools in Kentico that speaks to that puzzle. And by using activity management, you can get an understanding of what's going on at a very user-centric level or contact-centric level to kind of understand what that user is doing, and maybe more importantly, what they're not doing. So if you're not using EMS to basically track your activities, I recommend turning that on pretty much right after you sign out of this webinar, because tracking the data and understanding the usage is kind of the bedrock or the key component to this whole topic, and it actually gives you a lot more value and insight into how your visitors are using your website that you're powering with Kentico. So tracking the data with activity management is pretty key. But basically, this idea of churn comes down to, like I said, knowing when customer turnover is happening. So let's pretend now that we're in the scenario that you are experiencing some churn and you want to do something about it. So you've been tasked with, okay, I have a software as a service company or maybe an e-commerce website that I want to know why people are leaving. And to do that, I'm going to walk through this process of how do we take a problem of just why people are leaving, translate it into data, and then do something about it. So that's really what the rest of the presentation is about, is I'm setting up the scenario of I want to stop churn. What do I do next? So the first step of that is to start by reviewing that data, which is why I talked about activity tracking, because that's one of the places you can review. Analytics is another place that you can review. But to be more specific on this scenario, the first place to start is to start by looking at maybe the last 20 people or users or customers who canceled or who became inactive or who left your service or who haven't bought something from you in a very long time. So I'm saying 20 because it allows you to start off at a bite-sized chunk, and it allows you to do some manual human interaction with developing theories around why people are leaving. And If you take the scenario of looking at the data that you have on your website or product of someone using it and then not using it, this is the key. So, say Joe Smith is using your software. He's been a user for 10 days, and then all of a sudden he does nothing else after that. Well, what are the steps inside the system you can look at? Watch that journey that person came through to become a user, to hopefully become an active user, and then understand what they did or didn't do to maybe leave. So if you do that for the 20 last customers who canceled, hopefully you start to see a pattern, right? And so that as we talk about patterns, that's an important aspect of predictive analytics, because you're using data and behavior to define this sort of pattern approach and grouping like occurrences and customers together to at the end of the day understand and define an indicator, which is what the technical term for that would be. So predictive analytics starts with indicators, and those indicators are what has happened that we think might be the reason that someone's leaving. So if you can hopefully look at the last 20 customers, you can maybe find a few patterns, and I have a few examples. So you're looking at your data, but remember, it's not just technical. Don't just only look at your data. There's a human factor involved. So you should talk to your sales team. You should talk to your customer support team. So this review process of these 20 customers who have last left, don't only look at a report or only look at an Excel spreadsheet or only look at a CSV file. Go talk to people. Maybe talk to those customers if you can reach out to them. That'd be even better. Understand from firsthand maybe what pain they were experiencing and why it wasn't working. And I'm a big fan of Dilbert, so I thought I'd throw this in here to try to add a little humor, because it's a technical analytic topic and I don't want to be too boring. But when you talk to people, you can understand what they really said, as opposed to like what Wally is saying here, that you didn't ask me to do that. Well, yeah, actually, that's what we meant. So by talking to people and looking at data, that's the best way to start reviewing your situation. So maybe you go through that, right? Maybe you look at those 20 customers who left, and you come up with a few indicators. And I've got 4 or 5 examples here of maybe common ones that you might find in an e-commerce business or a software as a service business. So you can read the chart, but basically think of these things as maybe negative behaviors that happened right before that customer left. One of the most common ones might be that user submitted a contact us form and no one on your staff got back to them. That's bad experience for the customer. Maybe they become frustrated that no one replied to their inquiry or question or help topic request. So if no one's replying, and you start seeing that in like 4 or 5 of those 20 customers, that's an indicator that maybe that there's something going on there. Or maybe you start seeing that they're having poor initial experience with your service. And one of the ways you can do that is by looking at maybe like your debugging logs in the system or your event logs, and understanding that why are all these error messages happening for this specific user? So maybe that could account for a poor initial experience. Or maybe there was no activity at all from that user. As you start reviewing the data, or maybe talk to the person, maybe they give you the response, well, we just never used it because we didn't feel that there was value and I just was too lazy to. So maybe there's not enough orders. Maybe they downloaded something as a trial software, but they didn't convert it to being a full paid version of that software, so too little or stale activity. And one of the classic examples is actually they just never came back. So if someone hasn't logged in within the last 30 days to your product or service or your website, that's an indicator in itself, and that's actually one of the key indicators usually to customer health. If they're not logging in, then they're definitely not using your service and maybe not happy. And maybe an interesting one to talk about too is the last one on my list here is video content is becoming more and more important in everyday usage. I was talking to one of my staff members about how Google released an article lately that they said the way people consume YouTube is incredibly important, and when people are watching a how-to video, they've already made a decision to purchase, or they already are a customer and they want to use it better. So maybe you've got some videos on your website about how to use your product or service, and that same user is continually watching those videos over and over and over. And if they then don't convert and stay as a user on the site, that is an indicator that they had an issue. They were trying to figure it out by watching YouTube, and they couldn't figure out that answer. So maybe that's a pattern that one of those 20 people were using. So there's a lot more. These are just kind of some samples that I've kind of run into commonly in my experience. But basically, what we've done is gone from review and communicate with those 20 customers who left to now generating these theories. And these are the 5 theories that we're going to go with for the rest of the scenario and the rest of the example. But these are our indicators, and this is what we're going to watch out for. So now that we have gone through step 1 of understanding maybe and theorizing about what's going on, what do we do about it? And that's where Kentico, again, can kind of come into play to understand how do we put, maybe now that we have this theory, how do we apply this to a larger set? And one of the things that people don't use a whole lot in Kentico that they should, because it's a sweet feature, is dynamic contact groups. And what contact groups can do is basically organize a set of website visitors who happen to be users or not into little groups. But the neat thing is, don't think of this as like making a mailing list where I'm going to define 10 people in an Excel spreadsheet, I'm going to save that somewhere, and I'm going to maybe send them something. These are actually dynamic groups to where if someone enters the pattern or behavior of maybe not logging in within the last 30 days, they'll be added to the list. But then the minute they log in, they'll be taken out of this group or this list. So the system rebuilds on its own. You can even set up a schedule basis if you want to kind of understand and help you segment across all these different places. So that way I can get a group of all my users who've made a purchase in the last 90 days. I can make a group of all the brand new users who just registered within the last 90 days. I can look at people who have signed in at least one time in X period or downloaded a digital format of an ebook or something, or on a digital purchase. So you can define all these in Kentico. And it looks like, I apologize, I'm missing one of the screenshots that I was supposed to have in there for how you define them, but trust me, it's not too hard. You can use the macro rule editor, and in fact I think some other stuff on my blog has how to do that, or the Kentico help is there as well. We've taken all of the activity that's happened, and now we're focusing on groups of people that fit a certain behavior. So we're segmenting as the second step into identifying what our churn problem is. By using our indicators we defined, we're now putting, instead of just 20 people into a pattern, we're hopefully looking at the last 100, the last 1,000 if we have lots and lots of users. So the dynamic contact groups in Kentico really help us do that. But once we've done that, we need to look at the results. So here's where we get into the predictive part of the analytics. And basically, we've got now our nice little segmented groups of people, and I have a Kentico user ID to represent them. Because again, this is all anonymous. We're not trying to do like figure out whose name is on what. That doesn't matter. We're trying to look at users and their behavior. So the exercise here that I recommend is once you review, define your indicators, segment your people, then analyze that data and look at it from, okay, if Kentico user 120, who may be Joe, had a missed contact form the last X days, he gets a 1 for that indicator. And then all the way to the right of the table is, did that user cancel or not? So let's say user 121 is Joe, and he did have a bad contact form or no one replied to him. He didn't cancel. That's okay. We want to know that. Then you go on to the next user who has an indicator that matches who would be the last login lapse. So user 237, we've got a 1 that they haven't logged in within the last 30 days. And oh, you know what? That user did cancel recently. So they get a 1 in last login and they get a 1 in cancel. And you go down the path of, you're looking at those first 20 or bite-sized chunk or small sample size to understand where these indicators happened and did they cancel or not. That's all this matrix is identifying, is basically setting up the fact that like user 356, they had a poor initial experience because they had a lot of errors in their application, and they haven't logged in the last 30 days. So they get 1s for both of those, and they did cancel. So that actually is one that we might want to focus on a little bit more because they're getting more ticks in the matrix of understanding why they left. So it's not like it's that hard, but we're trying to just find the matches for the people that match our indicators. And again, start small, start on this small sample size. Maybe then once you've done that, you can start using some of like, so let me say it differently. Knowing that this is the task that you want to do and start to understand who has logged in and who hasn't, we can get into another part of Kentico that can help us out. So In case you didn't know, Kentico has this concept of reports built in, and it does a pretty good job of showing you different parts of the system. So as long as you have web analytics enabled, you've got these built-in reports that will tell you how many users registered to your site or how many logins have happened and things like that. The web analytics part of Kentico has quite a few different reports. And they're pretty good. They're okay, right? This is one of the built-in reports that is tracking how many users registered, so we can see by monthly, by daily, by hourly, or by yearly, however we really want, how many people are registering over time. And that then is, if I go back, maybe how we could use, if one of our indicators is registration, or pretend that chart was about login, we can start using those reports to fill in the different ticks in the matrix. So Kentico Reports are another tool in the toolbox you have as a marketer or a business owner to understand what's going on in your website. So I like them. But they're okay because they're not going to give you everything you might want to look for because you have a custom journey for your customers that matter for your product or service. But the cool part about Kentico is the fact that you can create your own custom analytics and reports. And here is where I think the value of Kentico starts coming in quickly. So we've talked about tracking your product usage. This is a key way through like literally 3 or 4 lines of code that you can start making your own metrics to understand how your product is being used. And Kentico does a lot out of the box. Like it'll already do if a product is added to a shopping cart, if a purchase is made, all the general ones that you might expect. But if you want to customize the system to add in your other analytics, it's very simple to do that. So in this scenario with this code, I'm just showing that we might have a getting started guide for our product or service as a PDF attachment on our website. So if somebody buys a product, buys a service, signs up for a service, one of the next steps is how do we help them? How do we make that onboarding process go pretty well? So all it takes is basically the couple lines of code here to say when somebody clicks the download button to get that getting started guide, let's track that. And this will tie it to when they did it, what the contact was, all that kind of fun stuff. You know, we've got the username of who did it. So you can start to build that analytical data tracking of product usage per user. And I don't think people know too much of that. Kentico can do this pretty easily. I mean, obviously it takes a little bit of code, but no one should be scared by that if they're a normal Kentico developer or even the most seasoned Kentico developer. The reports and analytics are pretty easy to use. There's lots of examples online how to do it. So basically, once you have the analytics tracking your custom behaviors, you then can take it to the next level and make custom reports. So using the analytic data, I have custom reports that I'm just showing some screenshots of here. Basically, one of the indicators we talked about was last login. So on the top right of the screen, I've got a report that I made that shows when a user was created and have they logged in and how many days ago was their last login. So this, again, you can use the Kentico system to generate these reports because all the data is in there and you can add whatever data is not in there that you want to start tracking to go back and fill up that matrix of have they logged in that one box. So I've been a big fan of custom reports in the past in using the standard reports, but now as I've started to play around with the customization system in these reports, I really like it even more. And as a tip, one thing that you can do, as opposed to going into your Kentico website to look at a report, you can actually right-click to any report in Kentico and say subscribe, and it will actually email you this report as it runs each day or each week or each month. You can set up that schedule however you want. So your website can start pushing you information into your inbox as opposed to you having to remember to go log into it. So it's kind of a cool little tip that some people don't know. So we've got the analytics capability, we've got reports, and we can use that to help define a matrix. But really what I'm trying to say here is that this is all possible because of the Kentico API, and it is very nice. Because of all this, we can collect the data we need to become predictive in our search. So as we go into the next aspect of things, and as we expand out and we use those reports to show more information, we can start getting a larger pattern. So I'm going to break away a little bit from the Kentico specific stuff, and I'm going to get into more predictive analytics at this point. And I'll try to not make this too technical, but in a way it kind of is, so bear with me. And definitely I'll have time for questions at the end. But basically, as we keep going and we add more data into that sample, we're doing the same pattern. We're making the matrix bigger. We're understanding how many people canceled, how many didn't. What do we do with that data is the next step, right? So now that we have an indicator, we have data that is matching those patterns or not, what do we do? And that's called a prediction score. So here's the predictive part of the talk, and it really falls around some simple math, even though this screen is a little jarring. But basically, we're using a correlation algorithm that's actually called the phi coefficient, and the link to Wikipedia is at the bottom of this slide to where you can see the fancy algorithm, and it's got a lot of crazy math derivative and square root stuff that actually makes me think of 8th grade math, so I don't really want to go there and show you that, so I'm going to skip that part. But I've simplified it, and basically you start drawing the correlation between did that missed contact form indicator have a 1 in the box, and did they also cancel in the same row of that last table. So I'll go back. So we're looking at, if they had a 1 here and a 0 here, that goes into yes, it was true, but they did not cancel. So you start just adding it up. If they had a 1 for poor initial experience and also a 1 for canceled, that would be a 1 for yes, poor initial experience is true and canceled is yes. So you start just simply adding up the numbers, and then I have a little spreadsheet that I just do the math to create what they call the 2x2 correlation. And what we're trying to say here is that, and by the way, I'll make the spreadsheet that I do this in available as part of the presentation download, because at the end we're going to do you can download the presentation as PDF, so that'll be included. Didn't quite have enough time to go through all of the fancy Excel formulas right now, but they're not too complicated. But what it really does is it generates that prediction score. And the higher the score, the higher the indicator of the problem. So you can see that even though we have more missed contact forms, the correlation was not true that people are canceling because they've missed the contact form or missed that experience. We've basically illustrated in the sample that the thing that we need to watch out for the most is last login lapse, because that is actually a closer correlation to someone canceling. So the higher the prediction score is basically the higher the indicator that that's what you need to watch, that is churn is happening because of the last login lapse. And so basically people are not using your system. That's the thing that has the highest score. That's the thing that you might want to focus on. Poor initial experience was second, so maybe that's what we focus on next. But using this prediction set, it's telling us that don't worry too much about the contact form experience, and don't worry too much about someone maybe not using as much activity throughout the month as you might thought. So this whole idea of prediction score, the phi correlation, and the 2x2 comparison, it all is trying to get us from a theory to actual real hard data. And this score shows that the one in yellow is the one to watch out for the most. So now I'm going to get into maybe what do we do about that, right? So do remember that there's no silver bullet. Your product or service is custom and different for all of the value that you provide in that product or service. So don't think that because I have 5 indicators that say missed contact form, last login, all that other thing, that doesn't apply. You need to look for your behaviors and your patterns to understand that. And one of the key ways that you do that is by knowing your customer journey. So as I've done the research and as I've got my experience on helping businesses grow their e-commerce business, basically the first 90-day journey is really important, because that's a good indicator, a good amount of time to understand, is someone going to turn into a champion for you or not? But what people probably don't talk about as much is the fact that what about the last 90 days of someone who left? What patterns can we find in that last 90 days that are common across people who are leaving the site, who are churning out, to understand what do we need to do better? So I would really think about watching the first 90 days for people who succeed and become champion users and stay with you for a very long time, and then also focusing on what about the last 90 days that someone's a part of the product or service. So that journey is really important to understand that and watch for those indicators. But basically, the other part of what can I do about this is to know about your app. So we talked at the beginning of the chart of feature. Well, feature 1 is used this much, feature 2 is used this much. How long do these things take in the amount of hours or days is also important. So, if you have tasks in your app or service like editing and completing a profile, sharing a post, writing a review of a product or service, you should try to track how long that usually takes to become a conversion, or how long does it take? Is it within someone's first 1 or 2 days of being a member of the site, or is it within the first 30 days? And then you can start using that report that I showed you, or making your own custom reports that show people in that group or in that segment. And you can start looking at, if people are moving into that segment or group, do we have an issue, and should we reach out to them? So once you know your baseline, you're just setting up your baseline here to try to figure out what to do. What do we do about that next? So in Kentico, there are quite a few things that help us, right? We're talking about the digital marketing solution. If we were to look at pieces, if someone has that poor initial experience, and we define poor initial experience as lots of errors in the event log for that user, we could write a scheduled test that watches the event log by user and says, after a certain amount of time, use it as a trigger to do an automatic marketing automation process to send a getting started documentation link to that user. So nothing manual has to happen, hopefully, but maybe if we're finding that a user has a lot of issues, we can suggest, here's the help documentation, or here's a help video even that explains, because we know what stage you're in of being a user, here's what you should do next. So you can use the marketing automation component of Kentico to do that, and it's a great way to find value in the system you're using. One of the other things that they talk about often is what to do is do what they call an NPS, or Net Promoter Score. So you can reach out to your customers and say, hey, how would you recommend our product or service to your colleagues? Would you feel comfortable doing that? Would you not recommend us, or would you? And that's also a really good indicator of the customer happiness level or the customer health. So you can use online forms to go to do that. You can use marketing automation processes to automate that, and just use the system. But the idea here is that we're looking, now that we know these behaviors, like someone hasn't logged in a while, is really important. Use marketing automation, reach out to them, see how they're doing, and try to collect what's going on, and maybe stop that churn from happening. So, I've been talking a lot about churn, how to score it, how to make it better, but why does it all matter? At the end of the day, they've always said in business that keeping your current customers happy is a lot easier than finding new customers. And studies have shown, like this one, that if we can increase customer retention by 5%, that is, if we can stop churn from happening before it happens, we might be able to increase our profits by 25% to 95%. So that's why I thought it was important. That's why I was talking about it today. Hopefully you learned a little bit about predictive analytics and maybe what parts of Kentico apply and how to use them to maybe translate into stopping churn. And with that, I'm going to go into questions. So,
I was going to say, I haven't seen any questions come in, so if you do have a question, please submit via the questions, and I will make sure Brian gets a chance to answer them.
All right. Okay. Well, cool. So we'll skip the questions for now. Definitely feel free to reach out to me. I'll have my contact info on the last slide, but I do want to point out before I leave one more important thing. Like I said at the beginning, the Kentico user group is a pretty good group, pretty good resource for learning on Kentico. The next one is after the 404 conference. If you want to know more, check out kenticousergroup.com, and feel free to participate, suggest that you might want to talk. Thanks a lot, Brian, for hosting and having me on the webinar. Here's my contact info, everybody, so feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or at my blog, where I talk about Kentico best practices, tips, and tricks. Those can be technical, they can be marketing, all sorts of fun stuff. So I think with that, that's all I have.